Fame and fortune. These things are not so easy to achieve. The lucky few who do reach the top are idolized and adored. But what about when children get into the mix? What lengths would their managers, producers, and even their families go for the money the child earned? Should they have a right to their kid's success? Young stars in the early 20th century suffered from financial abuse during the rise of television and entertainment. Former child star Jackie Coogan sued his mother for reparations, leading to the Coogan Act in 1939. Despite legislative loopholes allowing cases to slip through the cracks, new laws and additions began to be added, which further secured these kids' rights and hold their parents to the responsibility of protecting their children to this day. In the early 20th century, Hollywood and film began to blossom as entertainment evolved past live performances. The first movie was created in 1872 with motion toys, and film expanded as they experimented with new technologies such as video editing. These developments led to exceptional movies and produced influential stars such as Charlie Chaplin. In this era, movies such as The Gold Rush would quickly shoot actors to the top, changing the concept of celebrities forever. As for finances, they would make anywhere from $50 to $2,500 a week. General state labor laws applied to actors, and they could join actors' unions such as the Screen Actors Guild for legal protection of their rights on set. Children also made their way into this newly found route to stardom. They would quickly become loved by the nation for their exemplary performances on the silver screen. On average, child actors in this era would make about $40 to $125 a week. However, an unfortunate lack of protections allowed for the exploitation of these young actors. Child labor laws were known to be a global struggle. As for America, regulations for child workers began post-industrialization, including attempts from groups such as the National Child Labor Committee to abolish child labor altogether. Laws were contested in court, one example being the Fair Labor Standards Act, signed in by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The act faced multiple vetoes and needed many attempts to even be put into law. More laws and cases came through the years, but the protections for these children and their rights were left unstable. Young stars, such as Baby Peggy, began to get leading roles in productions. As they made an appearance in TV and film, they solidified the growth of childhood acting. In addition to the struggle of implementing federal child labor laws, child actors had no specific protections for their rights. While the Fair Labor Standards Act was signed into law in 1938, which put restrictions and regulations in for working minors, the protections did not apply to kids in the entertainment industry. The act was created to protect those in workplaces that were considered hazardous. The entertainment industry did not meet the qualifications to be considered as such. An addition to a California Civil Code made in 1927 only made it more difficult for children to have control over their career. Before the addition, child actors could disaffirm their own contracts, and studios were discouraged from hiring them, knowing they could easily switch to a different studio. This law took away a child actor's right to disaffirm a contract, meaning if a judge approved a minor's contract to a studio, they were now bound to it without a way out. These laws, or lack thereof, would lead to exploitation of talents, influence, and finances of child actors due to the lack of responsibility taken by parents, directors, managers, and producers. John Leslie Coogan, famously known as Jackie Coogan, was a child actor during this era. He began his career at 18 months old, but truly took off in 1921 when he starred in the classic silent film The Kid with Charlie Chaplin. Before he was 18 years old, Coogan starred in 19 silent films and made millions, becoming a box office attraction. Unfortunately, Coogan would not receive all of his earnings due to a lack of legal protection of his rights, and his mother's ignorance towards the responsibility of managing his finances. As Coogan grew, so did his fortune. He was one of the most renowned child actors of the time, and he made around $4 million, which would be over $75 million today. When he was only 20 years old, Coogan, his father, and 3 passengers were forced off the road while driving in Mexico. Coogan was left severely injured, and all the passengers died, including his father. This became a hard time for the young star. With his father, John Coogan, now gone, his mother, Lillian Coogan, married their business manager and family lawyer, Arthur Bernstein, after a scandalous, publicized relationship. Just a few months later, Jackie Coogan turned 21. At this age, he'd be able to access his earnings, but his mother and stepfather stated they had no intention to give him any of his profits, and instead spent the money on luxuries for themselves. Coogan's mother said no promises were ever made to give Jackie anything. Every dollar a kid makes before he's 21 belongs to his parents. This statement was validated by the law regarding the issue at this time. She also argued that Coogan was not responsible enough to handle his own finances due to his struggle with alcohol addiction. After 2 years without his earnings, Coogan no longer had an income of his own and was living off his wife, Betty Grabble's earnings. He became appalled by his mother's irresponsible behavior and hurtful words, and finally decided to take action, stating, "Now I owe a duty to my wife and myself not to wait any longer." In 1938, he took his mother and stepfather to the Los Angeles Superior Court to sue for reparations. The case was full of allegations, emotions, and tension, constant back and forth between Coogan and his mother as they pled their cases. Lillian Coogan and Arthur Bernstein testified that they had every right to Coogan's money. He was never promised anything. Bernstein specifically claimed that Coogan made less than what he was saying. Coogan stated that he had every right to that money, and that his mother and stepfather were to be held accountable for their irresponsibility. After a long 18 months, the lawsuit ended in 1939. Coogan only came out with less than $126,000 from the original $4 million taken from him. All the publicity of the lawsuit, including many different news articles and rumors, caught the attention of lawmakers and judges. On Friday, April 22, 1938, during the lawsuit, Superior Judge Emmett Wilson issued a court order that no screen contracts with a minor can be approved unless the parents and guardians agreed to establish a trust in the child's name. This led to the creation of the California Child Actors Bill, also known as the Coogan Act, after the lawsuit. The law, in Coogan's words, gives most of the child's salary to a court trust fund so parents and guardians can't get it. After the lawsuit, Coogan continued his acting career, which included one of his most famous roles as Uncle Fester in the 1964 sitcom The Addams Family. He passed away on March 1, 1984, with around $15 million to his name. Now with the Coogan Act in place, it was legally required that every child actor had a trust monitored by the court called a Coogan account. This account would hold a minimum of 15% of a child's gross earnings. Then, once they had turned 18, they could access the money. While the first attempt was strong, it was still excluding other child celebrities, like musicians, singers, and stunt persons, and it was only in effect in California. As time passed, a noticeable trend occurred of studios using child actors less. This potentially could be due to the law, and on top of this new additional cost, producers may have to make more payments once they become adults if they are paid any royalties. These payments must be carefully planned in order to properly follow the law. It is theorized that because of this, studios avoided using child actors in film. However, some that did found loopholes and gaps in the Coogan Act to keep their young stars and avoid these costs. In many cases, parents would simply not create a Coogan account for their child at all. Child stars began to take matters into their own hands when it came to their rights and taking responsibility for their finances. 50 years after Coogan, a young pop idol, Tiffany Darwish, also known as Tiffany, took her mother to court to emancipate from her in 1988. Many more kids took this route and fought for their rights going into the 90s and 2000s. Revisions finally began to be made in 1999, and the act went through numerous changes. More states in the U.S. adopted regulations in order to protect child stars. As of today, 34 states and Puerto Rico have regulations in place specifically for kids and entertainment. They each have their own variations to these laws. For example, New York's laws is similar to California's, as children need a trust set up in their name where their finances will go. However, they also need what's called a custodian, which is someone who watches over the finances, whether as a legal guardian or professional financial advisor. As for children in states where there's no specific protections for child actors, including Nevada, Kentucky, and Oklahoma, general child labor laws implemented by the state are the only protections for these child actors. The most recent expansion of the Act, California Assembly Bill 1880, was made in September 2024.
Up with singer and former child star Demi Lovato to sign a new law protecting the earnings of child influencers.
This is essentially the Coogan law for the digital age.
Well, under the new labor law, child content creators on all platforms will now get a trust fund for their earnings.
The law went into effect on January 1st, 2025. Along with many kidfluencer controversies, lawsuits from kids and their families emerged in order to reclaim their earnings from corrupt management. States such as Ohio and Utah are also taking action, creating laws alike to the Coogan Act to protect children online. The actions Coogan took to reclaim his finances sparked new legislative steps in protecting child celebrities' rights, leaving behind a legacy of protection and financial security.